I go too fast, there's something here you really like. Good news is, it's on DVD out there. It's called Is America One Nation Under God? The bad news, just as fast on that DVD is what you're about to get. So, hope you know where Rewind is on your DVD player. Let's go through it. George Washington, father of the country. Everybody knows Washington. Any of these guys, you want to know whether or not they're men of faith? Real simple. Do some investigative journalism. Go talk to their friends. Go spend time with the people that spend time with them. You can do that through their journals, through their correspondence back and forth. They wrote letters to each other the way you and I text each other. I'm talking thousands and thousands of letters, volumes of letters. And you read all these things, you find out from guys like General Henry Knox in the Revolutionary War, served with this guy throughout the war, talks over and over again how he would walk in on General Washington, accidentally interrupting him. Guess what he's doing? That's right. Same thing happened in Congress. Secretary Thompson walks in on President Washington, accidentally interrupts him. He's kneeling in prayer. You go to Valley Forge right now in Pennsylvania there, and you'll see the big bronze monument of George Washington. He's kneeling in prayer. You go down the street, stained glass window, it's George Washington kneeling in prayer. You go to Washington, D.C. right now, private prayer room of our congressman. It's Washington kneeling in prayer. You've all seen the paintings over and over and over again of Washington praying. I mean, to me, it's just pretty amazing that an atheist founding father would pray that much. If we could just get Christians today to pray as much as our atheist founding fathers, we'd be a lot better off. Right? Okay. It's not just Washington, though. You can go to virtually any founding father. Gouverneur Morris, very important founding father. We don't talk about him anymore. He used to be in every textbook in America. Can't find him because he's not politically correct. The reason you used to see him in every textbook is because not only is he a signer of the Constitution, he's the most active man at the convention. He speaks 173 times there at the Constitutional Convention. That's more than anyone else. He influences the document more than anyone else, and he's the chairman of the committee that writes the Constitution. We know him as the penman of the Constitution. I think he knew what it was supposed to do, not supposed to do. Here's why you won't find him in textbooks anymore. He said, religion is the only solid basis of good morals. Therefore, education should teach the precepts of religion and the duties of man towards God. He said, wait, Rick, now the Supreme Court says education and religion, you got to keep those two as far apart as possible because of the Constitution. That'd be the same one that he gave us? Because he said we got to keep them side by side, and he's the guy that gave us the Constitution, because he said religion and education together, that's going to give you a good culture, a good society. Same thing when it comes to the law and religion. James Wilson was the second most active member at the convention. He spoke 168 times, and I think I forgot to put his slide in here. I did. Okay. He's the second most active member at the Constitutional Convention, and he was also a signer of the Declaration. He signed the Declaration and the Constitution, one of only 6 guys to do that. And he said, an original Supreme Court justice, by the way, first guy that George Washington named, he wrote legal commentaries on the Constitution. He started our law school system in America. You can't find a better expert. And Wilson said, human law, that's what our legislators pass, what our city council passes, what our Congress passes, human law must rest its authority ultimately upon that law which is divine. He said, far from being rivals or enemies, religion and law are twin sisters, they're friends, they're mutual assistants. Indeed, these two sciences run into each other, meaning they work side by side to give us a good culture and a good society. Do they run into each other today? You bet they do. Like a couple of Mack trucks having a head-on collision. You mention a Bible verse in a courtroom and we vacate the sentence. The opposite of what these guys actually gave us. When someone says to you, you can't define marriage as one man and one woman, that's bringing the Bible into this thing. I have taken the time to think out and plan out a very intellectual response to that. When they say, you're bringing the Bible into this, your response should simply be, yep. And then give them James Wilson, right? Because that's what the founders told us to do. You've got to base it on something. And when you base it on that higher law, you're basing it on that history and those thousands of years of proving that that's the right way to do it. Now, I bet you recognize these fellows right here. That's the 56 atheists that signed the Declaration of Independence, right? Not only are they atheists, supposedly these men are enemies of Christ. Enemies of Christ. Now, 2010, if you're an enemy of Christ, you can get into some hobbies, right? There's things to do. What if you lived back then and you're an enemy of Christ? What are you going to do for your hobby? What do you do in your spare time? Let's find out what these enemies of Christ were doing in their spare time. How about we start right back there in the back corner. That guy right there is named John Witherspoon. And John Witherspoon is actually, not only is he an important founding father, but you're looking at the Billy Graham of that day. I thought I had a certain, oh, I got the right, there we go. He is the Billy Graham of that day. And this guy is the best known evangelist throughout the colonies. He's responsible for 2 American translations of the Bible. Trained many of these guys you see in the picture there at Princeton. I mean, there's just no way you can call this guy an atheist enemy of Christ. And no question about where he stood on those things or the influence that he had on the other people right here. How about Secretary Thompson right here? Thompson's responsible for the Thompson Bible. Spent 25 years of his life translating the Greek Septuagint into English. What's an atheist enemy of Christ doing, spending his time doing something like that? 29. Now, if you think it's strange for Witherspoon as a pastor to be there, 29 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence held seminary degrees. Now, that's pretty good to get a bunch of atheist enemies of Christ to go to seminary. Of course, there was nothing else to do. I'm sure they were just there doing opposition research on this Jesus guy. Yeah. I'm sure you believe that. All right, so the point is, there's no question where their faith was. Now, how about this guy here, Benjamin Rush? The Founding Fathers actually said at his death that he was one of our 3 most important founders. That's how important he was. Benjamin Rush, amazing man. You talk about a Renaissance man, medical doctor, trained about 2,000 docs himself, father of our public school system under the Constitution. I mean, just phenomenal man. Benjamin Rush also started the first abolition society in America. In law school, I was told there's no reason for me to learn anything from these guys. They're all slave owners. I shouldn't even listen. Now that I've studied their lives, I can tell you 3/4 of the men you're looking at were abolitionists, wanted to get rid of slavery from the very beginning. In fact, Rush right there and Benjamin Franklin, it's hard to do this from under here. Where's Franklin? There he is. Benjamin Franklin right there. Those 2 guys, they wanted independence specifically to be able to get rid of slavery. Because they had ended slavery in 1773 in 2 states. Their home state of Pennsylvania does it in 1774. King George vetoes all those laws. Says you're keeping slavery whether you want it or not. So these 2 guys get together and they say in an act of civil disobedience, we're starting the Pennsylvania Abolition Society to stand against the king, and if we can get independence, we'll end slavery immediately. Well, they were wrong on that fact, obviously, because they weren't able to do it immediately. We couldn't get South Carolina and Georgia to vote, and they made a huge mistake. What did they do? They said, you know what? We're just going to leave it up to the states, and we'll be rid of slavery within a generation. It took 100 years and an awful lot of blood being shed before we could take the principles of the Declaration and apply them to all Americans. And it's because they made the mistake of saying an unalienable right. What did Trey get up here and say? He said the unalienable rights, meaning God gave them to you and government cannot take them away. The unalienable rights of life, liberty, an unalienable right. And instead of using government to protect that right, because what did Trey say after that? He said that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So the purpose of government, the very reason we have government, is to protect the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They didn't do it. They made a huge mistake. And now we're about to do the same thing today with the first right of life. Friends, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, what happens? It just goes back to the states. And instead of protecting that right, the very purpose of government, to protect the right of life, we're going to say just leave it up to the states. We need a human life amendment to the Constitution of the United States to make sure that at every level of government, we will protect that precious life. That's what government is supposed to be doing. So these guys were very instrumental. In fact, Rush spent 40 years of his life trying to get rid of slavery. Many of these guys were very involved in that. But see, here's one of the misnomers. We also think, not only do we think all these guys were a bunch of rich white guys that got us our freedom and all of them were slave owners, we don't realize some of the greatest heroes of the Revolution were black patriots. Some of the guys most instrumental in you being free today were great black patriots like this guy here, Peter Salem. He was the hero of Bunker Hill. We don't even know about him anymore. We don't hear about him. We don't study him. We don't read about him anymore. This guy is my favorite. He's the James Bond of the Revolutionary War. His name is James Armistead. And Armistead was a double agent for Lafayette. This guy was so cool. Here's what he did. He goes to Cornwallis, the leader of the British forces. He says, hey, I'm a runaway slave. I want to help you defeat those Americans. Cornwallis buys him hook, line, and sinker, brings him into the upper echelons, highest levels of the British military. He's able to spy on everything that they're doing, goes back to Lafayette, gives him all this good information, comes back to Cornwallis, gives him a false information campaign. Friends, that guy you're looking at right there, he's the reason we won at Yorktown. It was his disinformation campaign that set up that whole thing. We don't even know his name. We don't even talk about it anymore. There's so many we can talk. Wentworth Cheswell. He was a black patriot that was like Paul Revere, one of our writers, also the first elected black in America. Lots of great people. There's just so much about the faith and the heroes of the Revolutionary War that we just don't know. We've got to get back and study our history. Now, back to this issue of faith. This slide right here, this is my, I call it the Ginsu Night part of the presentation. Because this is where we say, but wait. There's more. Because we can go right here, September 7th, 1774, opening session of Congress. First time that the United States Congress meets. That's a pretty important occasion, right? One of the guys gets up, he says, this is important, we should start with a prayer. Another guy says, no, wait, we've got every denomination possible in this room, we can't pray. Samuel Adams stands up, father of the American Revolution. He says, I'm no bigot, I can pray with every man in this room, let's pray. They bring in the Reverend Jacob Duché, they pray for 3 hours. And they have a Bible study. John Adams right here, he writes home to Abigail. He says, Abigail, God so spoke to us out of Psalms 35, we believe for the first time we could defeat the British. He said, tell everybody back home, study Psalms 35, let God speak to them the same way that he did to us. Prayer and a Bible study. by a bunch of atheists in Congress. Now, these atheists are pretty interesting folks. I don't have time to do all 247. I'll tell you what we'll do. I'll give you some general numbers. 247 men considered to be the Founding Fathers. 95% outspoken Christians, no question about it. The material's out on the table. We'll document them for you one by one. There's just no question. They lived it, they talked it, they wrote it. There's just no argument. There's 10 guys out of 247 I got to take off the table and say they weren't Christians. But those 10 were not atheists. They were not agnostics. They were not even deists, by the way we use that term today. They didn't believe in some watchmaker God that put everything in motion and then was not involved. Even the 10 I'm taking off the table believed in God, believed in the hand of providence involved in our lives. Even one of the least religious, Thomas Paine, believed in intelligent design. I mean, Benjamin Franklin, one of the least religious for sure. In fact, I don't know if you can tell or not, but the ACLU and I are usually not on the same page. That might be obvious by now. Here's one we actually agree on, that this guy is one of our least religious founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin. Now here he is at the convention, the Constitutional Convention. The guy's 81 years old at the convention, by the way, which I used to think was old. I don't believe that anymore. And I was actually with a congressman just about 4 or 5 years ago, and we were doing an event kind of like this. And he gets up and he does his thing, and then he's going to introduce me. And he had just turned 81 the week before. And he was my congressman when I was in high school. That's how long he's been in Congress. He looks over at me and he's going to introduce me. He says, Rick, he said, I just turned 81. He said, I bet you think 81's old. I didn't answer. He said, listen, man. He said, I was at Senator Strom Thurmond's 100-year birthday party. He said, Thurmond looked over at me at that party and he said, oh, it'll be 80 years.